The key still worked. That surprised me more than anything else when I turned it in the lock of what used to be my home. 6 months overseas buying classic cars for wealthy collectors, and Julie hadn't even bothered to change the locks. Maybe she figured I'd never come back to this little coastal town in Maine. Maybe she hoped I wouldn't. I pushed open the front door and stepped into nothing. The hardwood floors gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through bare windows. Dust particles danced in the light, settling into perfect rectangles where our furniture used to sit. The couch, the coffee table, the entertainment center I'd built with my own hands, all gone. Even the curtains had vanished, leaving only the mounting hardware behind like skeletal remains. "Well, this is cozy," I muttered to the empty living room. My voice echoed back, hollow and mocking. "I'm Eddie Banks, and I restore classic cars for a living. Not the glamorous kind of restoration you see on television, where everything gets done in an hour with dramatic music. Real restoration work, the kind that takes months, leaves your hands permanently stained with grease, and pays just enough to keep a modest shop running in a town where most people drive 10-year-old Toyotas." I walked through the house methodically, checking each room. The bedroom, empty except for dust bunnies and a single wire coat hanger on the closet floor. The kitchen, bare cabinets hanging open like hungry mouths. Even the refrigerator was gone, leaving only the electrical outlet and a cleaner patch of linoleum where it had stood. In what used to be my home office, I found the first clue, a crumpled receipt partially hidden under the baseboard heating unit. I smoothed it out with fingers that still smelled like airplane coffee and overseas diesel fumes. Storage unit rental. Coastal Maine Storage Solutions. Paid for 3 months in advance. Julie's signature at the bottom. My phone buzzed. Text message from my wife. "Don't come back." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Too late. Already here." The response came immediately. "There's nothing left for you." "We'll see about that," I said to the empty room. Mrs. O'Reilly was waiting for me when I stepped onto the front porch. She lived next door and had the supernatural ability to appear whenever something interesting happened on our quiet street. 70-something, gray hair always perfectly curled, and eyes that missed nothing. "Eddie Banks," she said, shaking her head. "I wondered when you'd show up." "Hello, Mrs. O'Reilly. Lovely afternoon, isn't it?" She snorted. "Don't you try that polite nonsense with me. I saw what happened here. Saw that moving truck the day after you left. Saw that man helping your wife carry your television out to his fancy car. What man would that be? Tall fellow, drives one of those expensive sports cars, wears suits that probably cost more than my monthly pension." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They weren't very careful about closing the bedroom curtains, if you catch my meaning." I caught her meaning perfectly. "Did you happen to notice which direction they went with my stuff?" Mrs. O'Reilly's eyes lit up. She lived for neighborhood drama, and I was apparently about to provide her with the entertainment event of the decade. "Storage place out on Route 9. Saw the truck go by 3 times that first week." "3 times? Oh, yes. They cleaned you out good, Eddie. Took everything that wasn't nailed down. Even saw them loading up your toolbox from the garage." That got my attention. My toolbox contained 30 years' worth of specialized restoration tools, some of them custom-made. Without those tools, I couldn't work. Without work, I couldn't eat. I checked my phone for bank account access. The balance made my stomach drop. $47.36. 6 months ago, when I left for the overseas buying trip, there had been nearly $15,000 in that account. Money I'd saved for 2 years to buy a particular 1967 Mustang Fastback that was supposed to be the foundation of my shop's expansion. Another text from Julie. "Lawyer says you can't touch anything. It's all community property." I almost laughed. Community property. As if Julie had ever shown the slightest interest in my business or the long hours I spent bringing classic cars back to life. As if she'd ever appreciated the satisfaction of hearing a perfectly tuned engine purr to life after months of careful work. The afternoon sun was getting lower, casting longer shadows across the empty rooms. I walked back through the house one more time, looking for anything they might have missed. In the basement, behind the water heater, I found my old Navy sea bag. They'd probably assumed it was just junk. Inside, I found my discharge papers, some old photographs, and most importantly, my backup set of business documents. Receipts, invoices, and registration papers for every tool and piece of equipment I'd bought over the years. All dated before my marriage to Julie. "Community property," I said to the empty basement. "We'll see about that." My phone rang. Tommy Reeves, my young apprentice at the shop. "Eddie? Man, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "Overseas buying trip ran long. What's the situation at the shop?" "Well, that's the thing. Your wife came by about a month ago. Said you were staying overseas permanently. She had some guy with her, and they loaded up a bunch of your equipment. Said they were putting it in storage until the divorce was finalized. I closed my eyes. What did they take? The plasma cutter, the engine hoist, most of your hand tools. I tried to stop them, but she had paperwork. Looked official. Tommy, I need you to do me a favor. Meet me at the shop in an hour and bring your laptop. Sure thing, boss. But Eddie, there's something else. That guy who was with your wife? I've seen him around town. Chad Foster. He's some kind of real estate developer. Flips houses for rich people from Boston. Chad Foster. Now I had a name to go with Mrs. O'Reilly's description. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I locked up the empty house and walked to my truck. The 1985 Ford F-150 wasn't much to look at, but it had been parked at the airport for 6 months and started on the first try. Reliable, like everything else in my life used to be. The drive to my shop took me through the center of town, past the harbor where fishing boats bobbed at their moorings, past the tourist shops that sold overpriced lobster rolls to summer visitors, past the real estate office where Julie worked. Her car wasn't in the parking lot. Banks Classic Car Restoration occupied a converted garage on the industrial side of town. Not fancy, but it had good lighting, solid concrete floors, and enough space for 4 cars. I'd been renting it for 8 years, slowly building my reputation one satisfied customer at a time. Tommy was waiting when I pulled up. 22 years old, skinny as a rail, with an enthusiasm for old cars that reminded me of myself at that age. He'd been working for me for 2 years, learning the trade while studying automotive technology at the community college. Boss, I'm really glad you're back. This whole thing has been crazy. We walked into the shop together. Half my equipment was gone, just as Tommy had said. Empty spaces on the workbenches where my tools used to live. The good news was that the cars were still there. A 1969 Camaro SS that was nearly finished, and a 1973 Corvette that needed engine work. The customers have been calling, Tommy said. I told them you'd be back, but some of them are getting anxious. We'll take care of them. First, though, I need to recover my equipment. Tommy fired up his laptop. What's the plan? I showed him the storage unit receipt. Ever done any detective work? His eyes lit up. You mean like hacking? I mean like research. Legal research. I want to know everything there is to know about Chad Foster. Where he lives, where he works, what kind of car he drives, where he gets his coffee in the morning. I can do that. Social media makes it easy. While Tommy worked his computer magic, I walked around the shop, taking inventory of what remained. They'd been selective in what they took, mostly the expensive, portable items. The heavy equipment was still here, probably because they couldn't figure out how to move it without help. Got him, Tommy said after 20 minutes. Chad Foster, age 41, owner of Foster Development, LLC. Specializes in buying old houses, fixing them up, and selling them to wealthy retirees. Lives in Harborview Condominiums, Unit 4B. Drives a 2023 Porsche 911. Social media? Oh yeah, he's all over it. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Guy loves to show off. Look at this. Tommy turned the laptop screen toward me. Chad Foster's Instagram feed was a carefully curated display of expensive meals, exotic vacations, and gym selfies. The kind of guy who tagged every post with motivational quotes about success and winning. Recent posts? I asked. That's the interesting part. Look at this one from last week. The photo showed Chad and Julie at some upscale restaurant. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with money from my bank account. The caption read, "Life is good when you're with someone who appreciates the finer things. Blessed new chapter." Subtle, I said. Tommy scrolled through more posts. He's been posting about her for months. Started right after you left for overseas. Look, here's one where they're at some charity event together. The photo showed Julie and Chad at what looked like a formal dinner. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his arm. They looked comfortable together, familiar. This wasn't a new relationship. How long do you think this has been going on? Tommy asked. Longer than 6 months, I said. You don't get that comfortable with someone overnight. My phone buzzed with another text from Julie. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just accept it and move on. I showed the message to Tommy. What do you think? Should I accept it and move on? Tommy grinned. Boss, I've seen you spend 6 months rebuilding an engine that most people would have thrown away. You don't give up on anything. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The storage facility sat on a flat stretch of land between Route 9 and the salt marshes, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Coastal Maine Storage Solutions. 3 rows of identical metal buildings painted industrial beige, designed to hold the overflow of American consumer culture. Tommy and I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching the evening shift manager lock up the office. The place would be deserted until morning, which suited my purposes perfectly. "You sure about this, boss?" Tommy asked, nervously adjusting his baseball cap. "This feels like breaking and entering." "Can't break into what's already mine," I said. "Besides, we're not stealing anything. We're conducting an inventory." The lock on Unit 47B was a standard padlock, the kind they sell at hardware stores for $15. I had it open in less than 2 minutes with a tension wrench and pick set from my Navy days. Some skills you never forget. Tommy whistled low when I rolled up the metal door. They really cleaned you out. The 10 by 12 unit was packed floor to ceiling with the contents of my former life. Furniture, appliances, boxes of personal items, and most importantly, my tools. Everything arranged with military precision, probably Chad's contribution. The guy struck me as the type who organized his sock drawer. "Start with the toolboxes," I told Tommy. "I want to document everything before we take it." We spent an hour photographing and cataloging, my plasma cutter, worth $3,000, the engine hoist I'd bought 2 years ago, boxes of specialized wrenches and diagnostic equipment. Mixed in with the tools were personal items that made my jaw clench. Photo albums from my childhood, my father's Purple Heart from Vietnam, books I'd been reading, but it was the other items that really caught my attention. Women's clothing that definitely wasn't Julie's style, too young, too trendy, a man's designer watch still in its box, expensive electronics still in their packaging. "Boss, check this out," Tommy said from the back corner of the unit. He'd found a cardboard file box labeled "Personal" in Julie's handwriting. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts going back 6 months. A complete financial record of my wife's new life. I flipped through the documents by the light of my phone's flashlight. Dinner receipts from restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel bills from weekend getaways I'd never taken. Jewelry purchases that made my monthly rent look like pocket change. "She's been busy," Tommy said, reading over my shoulder. "Very busy and very expensive." At the bottom of the box, I found something that made me smile for the first time in days. A receipt from an online auction site where Julie had been selling my possessions. Not just selling them, getting premium prices for them. My vintage Snap-on tool set had gone for $1,200. A restored carburetor I'd planned to use on the Camaro had sold for $800. "She's been running her own little business," I said, "selling my stuff online while I was overseas." Tommy studied the receipts. "Look at the dates. She started selling your things the week after you left. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision." I photographed every document, every receipt, every bank statement. Evidence of a systematic plan to liquidate my life while I was conveniently out of the country. "What's the plan, boss?" "First, we take back what's mine, but carefully. I don't want them to know we were here." We loaded my tools into the truck, leaving the furniture and household items behind. I wasn't interested in fighting over a couch or a television, but my tools were my livelihood, and no amount of legal paperwork was going to keep me from them. As we worked, I explained my theory to Tommy. This whole thing was planned from the beginning. Julie didn't just decide to leave me while I was gone. She's been setting this up for months, maybe longer. "What makes you think that?" "The timing. She convinced me to take that overseas buying trip. Said it would be good for the business, but now I'm wondering if she just wanted me out of the way while she cleaned out our accounts and moved in with her new boyfriend." Tommy hefted a box of wrenches into the truck. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to return the favor." We finished loading just as the security guard made his evening rounds. The guard waved at us from his golf cart, probably assuming we were legitimate customers. In a way, we were. Back at the shop, we unloaded the tools and got them organized. Having my equipment back felt like reclaiming part of my identity. These weren't just tools, they were extensions of my hands, instruments I'd used to create something meaningful from rusted metal and broken dreams. "Tommy, I need you to do some more research for me. I want to know everything about Chad Foster's business, who his clients are, what properties he's working on, where he gets his financing." "Looking for leverage?" "Looking for opportunities." While Tommy worked his computer magic, I studied the financial documents we'd found in the storage unit. Julie had been thorough in documenting her new lifestyle, probably for tax purposes, but she'd also created a detailed record of how she'd been spending my money. The hotel receipts were particularly interesting. Weekend trips to Boston, Portland, even New York, all charged to credit cards that were linked to our joint checking account. She'd been living like a wealthy woman while I was working 16-hour days overseas, negotiating with car dealers and shipping companies. "Boss, you're going to want to see this," Tommy said. He'd pulled up Chad Foster's business website. Foster Development, LLC, specialized in luxury residential renovations for discerning clients. The photo gallery showed before and after shots of houses that had been transformed from modest family homes into upscale showplaces. "Check out the client testimonials," Tommy said. I read through the glowing reviews. Chad Foster was apparently a miracle worker who could turn any property into a gold mine. But it was the financial information that really caught my attention. The guy was leveraged to the hilt, bank loans, investor partnerships, lines of credit that would make a normal person nervous. "He's playing with borrowed money," I said. "Big borrowed money." "Is that bad?" "Only if something goes wrong. Guys like this, they look successful on the surface, but they're usually one bad deal away from bankruptcy." Tommy pulled up more information. Property records, business filings, court documents. Chad Foster had been sued twice in the past 3 years by contractors who claimed he hadn't paid them. Both cases had been settled out of court. "Interesting pattern," I said. "Our boy Chad likes to spend other people's money." My phone rang. "Julie, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at Rossetti's bar on Harbor Street. 1 hour." Rossetti's was an upscale place that catered to tourists and locals with more money than sense. Not the kind of place I usually frequented, but perfect for the image Julie was trying to project. "Want me to come with you?" Tommy asked. "No, but keep that laptop handy. I have a feeling I'm going to need more information about Mr. Foster very soon." The drive to Rossetti's gave me time to think. Julie wanted to meet in public, which meant she was either afraid of me or planning to make a scene. Knowing my wife, I was betting on the scene. I parked across the street and watched through the window for a few minutes before going in. Julie was already there, sitting at a corner table with Brittany Hill, her best friend and constant companion. Brittany was the kind of woman who lived for other people's drama, especially if it involved romance and betrayal, but it was the man sitting with them who really got my attention. Chad Foster in person was exactly what I'd expected from his social media presence. Tall, fit, expensive haircut, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He had the confident smile of someone who'd never been punched in the face. I walked into the bar and headed straight for their table. "Hello, Julie. Ladies. Gentlemen?" Julie looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of guilt and defiance that didn't suit her. "Eddie, this is Chad Foster." Chad stood and extended his hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Eddie. Julie's told me so much about you." I looked at his hand for a moment, then sat down without shaking it. "I'm sure she has." The awkward silence stretched for several seconds before Brittany jumped in with nervous chatter. "Eddie, you look great. That overseas trip must have agreed with you?" "It was educational," I said. "I learned a lot about international business, import and export regulations, how to track shipments, how to verify ownership of valuable items." Chad's smile faltered slightly. Julie leaned forward. "Eddie, we need to discuss the practical aspects of our separation. The house, the joint accounts, the division of assets." "What assets would those be?" I asked. "From what I can see, most of our assets have already been divided." "The courts will determine what's fair," Chad said. I turned to look at him directly for the first time. "I'm sorry. I don't remember asking for your opinion. This is between my wife and me." "Chad is my attorney," Julie said quickly. "Really? What kind of law does he practice?" Chad's confident smile was looking more forced by the minute. "I have experience with business law, real estate transactions, that sort of thing." "But not divorce law." "Well, no, but then maybe you should let the adults talk." Brittany giggled nervously. Julie shot her a sharp look. "Eddie, there's no need to be hostile," Julie said. "We can handle this like civilized people." I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank balance. $47.36. That's what you left me to live on while you were playing house with your boyfriend. How civilized does that seem to you? That money was community property. That money was earned by me, working 16-hour days, while you were here playing real estate agent and apparently auditioning for a new husband. Chad started to say something, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm curious about something, Chad. When did you and Julie first meet?" He glanced at Julie before answering. "A few months ago. We met through mutual friends." "Which friends would those be?" Another glance at Julie. "Just people around town. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't. See, I've lived in this town for 8 years, and I don't recall ever hearing your name before today. So I'm wondering how my wife, who works in real estate and spends her evenings at home watching television, happened to meet a successful developer like yourself." The silence at the table was deafening. Maybe she met you through work, I continued. Maybe you needed someone to help sell one of your renovation projects. Chad's face was starting to flush. I don't see how that's relevant. Oh, it's very relevant, because if you and Julie have been doing business together, then there are records. Contracts, commissions, paper trails, and if those business relationships started before I left for overseas, well, that would be interesting information for a divorce attorney. A real divorce attorney. I stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the table. Julie, when you're ready to have an honest conversation about our marriage and what went wrong, give me a call. But next time, leave your business partner at home. As I walked away, I heard Brittany whisper loudly, I told you he'd figure it out. Manny Rodriguez had been my friend since our Navy days, when we'd served together on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf. Now he ran a towing and recovery service from a cluttered garage on the outskirts of town, specializing in pulling tourist cars out of ditches and recovering vehicles from accident scenes. He was under the hood of a damaged pickup truck when I found him the next morning, his massive frame bent over the engine compartment like a bear investigating a beehive. Eddie Banks, he said without looking up. Heard you were back in town. Also heard your wife cleaned you out while you were gone. News travels fast. Small town, amigo. Especially when the news involves a cheating wife and a fancy-pants developer. He straightened up and wiped his hands on a greasy rag. What do you need? I'd known Manny would ask that question. In all the years I'd known him, he'd never wasted time on sympathy or small talk. If you came to see Manny, you needed something, and he wanted to know what it was. Information, and maybe a favor. Information's free. Favors cost extra. I told him about my meeting with Julie and Chad the night before, and about the financial documents I'd found in the storage unit. Manny listened without comment, occasionally nodding or grunting to show he was following the story. So, this Chad character has been playing house with your wife for months, spending your money, and now he's pretending to be her lawyer? That's about the size of it. Manny pulled a beer from a cooler and offered me one. It was barely 10 in the morning, but Manny had always operated on his own schedule. What kind of car does he drive? 2023 Porsche 911, silver. Manny's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam I remembered from our military days. Fancy. Probably keeps it in the garage at those Harborview condos. Those places have underground parking, real secure. You know the building? I've towed cars out of there before. Rich people, they think their money makes them immune to the laws of physics. Guy last winter tried to drive his BMW up an icy hill, ended up sliding backward into a fire hydrant. I could see where this conversation was heading, and I liked it. Hypothetically speaking, I said, if someone wanted to send a message to the owner of a silver Porsche, what would you recommend? Manny took a long pull from his beer and considered the question. Hypothetically, I'd say it depends on what kind of message you want to send. You want to inconvenience him, embarrass him, or educate him. All three. In that case, you'd want something that looks like an accident but causes maximum aggravation, something that makes him look foolish in front of other people. We spent the next hour discussing the theoretical vulnerabilities of expensive sports cars and the various ways those vulnerabilities might be exploited by someone with mechanical knowledge and a flexible moral compass. By the time I left Manny's garage, I had a plan. That afternoon, I drove to Harborview Condominiums, an upscale development overlooking the harbor. The kind of place where units started at $500,000, and the Homeowners Association had rules about what color flowers you could plant. Chad's Porsche was parked in space 4B, just as Tommy had predicted. Silver paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Not a scratch or dent anywhere on its perfect surface. The kind of car that screamed, "Look at me, I'm successful." I spent a few minutes walking around the parking garage, getting familiar with the layout. Security cameras in the corners, but positioned to watch the entrances and exits, not individual parking spaces. The garage was quiet in the middle of the afternoon, most residents either at work or out enjoying the late summer weather. The Porsche's hood was locked, but the air intake vents behind the doors were easily accessible. I pulled a small plastic bag from my pocket, filled with cooked shrimp I'd bought at the grocery store that morning. The shrimp went into the vents, where they would be impossible to remove without disassembling half the car's interior. Next, I used a valve stem tool to let most of the air out of the tires. Not enough to make them obviously flat, just enough to make the car handle poorly and trigger the tire pressure warning system. Finally, I applied a thin coating of petroleum jelly to the door handles and steering wheel. Invisible, but guaranteed to leave Chad's hands slippery and greasy. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes. That evening, Tommy and I were working late at the shop when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Julie's number. "Eddie, what did you do to Chad's car?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," His Porsche smells like rotten fish, and he can't get the steering wheel clean. The dealership says someone put seafood in the air vents. That's terrible. Vandalism is a serious crime. He should call the police. There was a long pause. He can't call the police. Why not? Another pause. Because he was parked somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. I almost laughed. Chad had been cheating on someone else when his car got sabotaged. The irony was beautiful. Julie, I'm sorry to hear about Chad's car troubles, but I don't see how that's my problem. I've been at the shop all day, working on legitimate customer vehicles. Tommy can vouch for me. Tommy gave me a thumbs up from across the garage. This isn't over, Eddie. No, I said. It's not. The next morning brought fresh entertainment. Tommy arrived at the shop with his laptop and a huge grin. Boss, you need to see this. Chad Foster posted about his car problems on social media. He showed me the post. Chad had written a long, angry rant about vandalism and disrespect for other people's property. But the best part was the comments section, where his friends and business associates were making jokes about the smell and suggesting that maybe he'd parked too close to the harbor. Look at this one, Tommy said, pointing to a comment from someone named Jennifer Walsh. She says maybe he should try parking at home instead of prowling around other neighborhoods. Sounds like Chad has some explaining to do. It gets better. Check out his girlfriend's response. A woman named Ashley had commented, maybe if you spent less time driving around town and more time at home, this wouldn't happen. Chad was getting roasted by his own social circle, and it was all being preserved for posterity on the internet. Screenshot everything, I told Tommy. This is comedy gold. My phone rang. Mrs. O'Reilly. Eddie, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I thought you should know. That man who was helping your wife move your things, he was here again last night. At the house? Parked right in your driveway, bold as brass. But here's the interesting part. Your wife wasn't with him. He was with some other woman. Younger, blonde hair, very flashy. I thanked Mrs. O'Reilly and hung up. Chad was juggling multiple women, which explained why he couldn't call the police about his car. It also gave me another angle to work. Tommy, I need you to dig deeper into Chad's social media. I want to know about all his female friends, especially anyone who's been commenting on his posts regularly. Looking for his other girlfriends? Looking for leverage. While Tommy worked his computer magic, I focused on the cars in the shop. The 1969 Camaro was nearly finished, and the customer had been calling every day asking about progress. Normal work felt good after the chaos of the past few days, the familiar rhythm of diagnosis, repair, and restoration. But I was also planning my next move. Chad Foster thought he could steal my wife, spend my money, and walk away without consequences. He was about to learn that some people fight back. Boss, I found something interesting, Tommy said. Chad's been tagged in photos with at least 3 different women in the past 2 months, and none of them are Julie. He showed me the pictures. Chad at various restaurants and social events, always with a different attractive woman. The guy was running a regular rotation. Player, I said. Big time. But here's the really interesting part. Look at the dates on these photos. I studied the timestamps. Chad had been photographed with other women even after he'd started posting pictures with Julie. The man was hedging his bets, keeping multiple romantic options open. I wonder if Julie knows about his other girlfriends, Tommy said. I wonder if his other girlfriends know about Julie. We spent the rest of the afternoon documenting Chad's social media presence and cross-referencing his activities with the financial records I'd found in the storage unit. A pattern emerged. Chad was using different women to fund his lifestyle, borrowing money from one to impress another, keeping multiple relationships going simultaneously. He's running a con game, I said. Julie isn't his girlfriend, she's his mark. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to give him exactly what he deserves. That evening, I drove back to Harbor View Condominiums. Chad's Porsche was in the shop, probably getting the shrimp smell professionally removed, but his parking space wasn't empty. A red BMW convertible sat in space 4B, and through the lobby windows, I could see Chad with a blonde woman who definitely wasn't Julie. I took pictures with my phone, making sure to capture both Chad and his companion, along with the BMW's license plate. Then I sent an anonymous text to Julie. Thought you should know your boyfriend is entertaining other women at his condo. Check his Instagram. The response came back within minutes. Who is this? A concerned friend. I didn't hear back from Julie that night, but Tommy arrived at the shop the next morning with news. Boss, Chad's social media went crazy last night. Someone's been commenting on all his posts, calling him a cheater and a liar. The comments are getting nasty. Any idea who's doing the commenting? Tommy grinned. 3 different women, and they're all mad as hell. Looks like somebody told them about each other. Shame when that happens. Yeah, real shame. Oh, and there's something else. Julie called the shop this morning looking for you. She sounded upset. Did she leave a message? Just said she needs to talk to you. Said it was important. I was curious about what Julie had to say, but I wasn't ready for another conversation. Not yet. I had more work to do first. That afternoon, Manny called with an update. Your boy Chad had his car towed to the dealership yesterday. Mechanic there says it's going to cost him $3,000 to get the smell out. They have to replace the entire ventilation system. Expensive lesson. Gets better. Word around town is that his business partners are asking questions about his personal life. Apparently some of his female friends have been calling his office, demanding to know where their money went. Money? Seems like Chad's been borrowing from his girlfriends to fund his real estate deals, promising big returns on investment, that sort of thing. But now that they're all mad at him, they want their money back. I whistled softly. How much money are we talking about? Enough to put him in serious trouble if they all demand repayment at the same time. Interesting. Thought you'd like that. Oh, and Eddie, that favor you asked about? Consider it done. What favor? You'll see. The next morning, I got my answer. Chad's Porsche, fresh from its expensive repair at the dealership, had been towed from a no-parking zone in front of the courthouse. According to the local newspaper's police log, the vehicle had been parked illegally while the owner was inside filing some kind of legal paperwork. The towing fee, storage charges, and fine would cost Chad another $500. Manny's got a wicked sense of humor, Tommy said, reading the police log over my shoulder. He's a good friend to have. My phone rang. Julie again. This time I answered. We need to talk, she said. Her voice sounded strained, tired. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere, alone? Where? The house. Our house. I'll be there at 7 tonight. She hung up before I could respond. Tommy looked up from his computer. You going to meet her? Yeah, but I'm bringing backup. Want me to come with you? No, but keep your phone handy. If you don't hear from me by 8 o'clock, call Manny. You think she's planning something? I thought about the question. The Julie I'd married wouldn't hurt a fly, but the woman who'd cleaned out our bank accounts and moved in with another man while I was overseas was someone I didn't know. I think she's desperate, I said, and desperate people do unpredictable things. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that evening. Still empty, but somehow less hollow than before. Maybe it was because I knew I wasn't coming home to stay. Maybe it was because I finally understood what I was dealing with. Julie was waiting in the living room, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall where our couch used to be. She looked smaller than I remembered, and older. The stress of the past few days had carved new lines around her eyes. Hello, Eddie. Julie. I stayed standing, keeping the length of the room between us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the bare windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Thank you for coming, she said. You said it was important. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed. Chad's been lying to me. About what? About everything. His business, his finances, his other relationships, everything. I waited for her to continue. Those women who've been calling his office, demanding their money back, he told me they were just angry ex-girlfriends trying to cause trouble. But it's not true. He borrowed money from them. Lots of money. And he's been using that money to fund his lifestyle while he waits for his real estate deals to pay off. Including his lifestyle with you. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. Those expensive dinners, the weekend trips, the jewelry he bought me, it was all paid for with money he borrowed from other women. And now they want it back. They want more than that. They want him ruined. One of them hired a private investigator. Another one's talking about filing criminal charges for fraud. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Mrs. O'Reilly was watering her garden, but I could tell she was really watching my house. Why are you telling me this, Julie? Because I made a mistake. A huge mistake. And now I don't know how to fix it. What kind of mistake? She was crying now, tears running down her cheeks. I gave him access to our accounts. Not just the checking account, everything. The savings, the retirement fund, even the emergency fund we set up for the business. I turned around slowly. How much? All of it. $38,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $38,000 represented years of careful saving, money I'd set aside for expanding the business, for buying the equipment I needed to compete with the bigger restoration shops in Portland and Boston. When? 2 weeks ago. He said he had a deal that would double our money in 6 months. a house flip in Camden that was guaranteed to make a huge profit. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. He made it sound so easy, so certain, and he said that when you came back from overseas, we'd have enough money to buy you out of the business and start fresh. Buy me out of my own business? Eddie, I know how it sounds. It sounds like you and your boyfriend were planning to steal everything I've worked for and leave me with nothing. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Chad said you'd be better off without the responsibility of the business. He said you could take the buyout money and start over somewhere else. How generous of him. But there is no deal. There never was. The house in Camden belongs to one of his other girlfriends, and she's threatening to have him arrested if he doesn't pay back the money he borrowed from her. I sat down on the floor across from her, trying to process what she was telling me. So where's our money? Gone. Chad spent it trying to keep his other creditors happy. He's been juggling debts for months, borrowing from one woman to pay back another. Our money was just the latest infusion. And now the whole house of cards is falling down. She nodded. His business partner kicked him out of the office yesterday. The bank froze his accounts, and those women who were calling, they're not just angry anymore. They're organized. They've hired a lawyer, and they're going after everything he owns. I stood up and walked to the window again. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think about was $38,000 disappearing into Chad Foster's failed con game. What do you want from me, Julie? I want you to forgive me. For what? For cheating on me? For stealing my money? For planning to destroy my business? You're going to have to be more specific. For all of it. For everything. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. I turned around to look at her. She was still sitting on the floor, still crying, but there was something different in her expression. Desperation, maybe, or calculation. There's something else, isn't there? She nodded reluctantly. Chad's creditors aren't just going after him. They're going after anyone who benefited from his scheme. That includes me. And by extension, me. The lawyer says that since we're still legally married, they can come after our joint assets to recover the money their clients lost. Now I understood why she wanted to talk. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. This was about damage control. What joint assets? I asked. You cleaned out our accounts, remember? The business. Your shop, your equipment, your customer contracts. They're all technically marital property. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They want to seize my business? They want to seize everything. The shop, the tools, even your truck. Anything that can be sold to recover the money Chad stole. I walked over and sat down next to her, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. Julie, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you telling me that your boyfriend's creditors are planning to destroy my livelihood to recover money that you gave him without my knowledge or consent? I don't know. Maybe. The lawyer wasn't specific about the details. What lawyer? The one representing Chad's victims. She called me this morning. I pulled out my phone and started recording. What's her name? Julie looked at the phone nervously. Why are you recording this? Because I want a record of this conversation. What's the lawyer's name? Patricia Morrison. She has an office in Portland. And she told you that my business assets could be seized to pay Chad's debts? She said it was possible. She said that since I benefited from the stolen money, and since we're married, our joint property could be used to make restitution. I stopped the recording and put the phone away. Julie, do you understand what you've done? I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to steal my money. You chose to trust a con man over your husband. And now you're choosing to come to me for help only because your choices have consequences. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Eddie, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can work together to protect what's left. What's left? Julie, there's nothing left. You and Chad spent it all. The business is mine. I built it before I met you, and I'll rebuild it after you're gone. But I'm not going to let your mistakes destroy what I've worked for. I stood up and headed for the door. Where are you going? To talk to a lawyer, a real lawyer, one who specializes in protecting people from the consequences of their spouse's bad decisions. Eddie, wait, there's something else. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. What now? Chad's missing. I turned around slowly. Missing how? He left town yesterday, packed up his condo and disappeared. His business partner thinks he went to Florida, but nobody knows for sure. Taking what money with him? Whatever he could get his hands on. He cleaned out his remaining bank accounts, sold his car to a dealer in Boston, even pawned some jewelry. Including the jewelry he bought you with my money? She nodded miserably. He took everything. I walked back across the room and sat down next to her again. Julie, I need you to understand something. Chad didn't just steal from his other girlfriends. He stole from us. He stole our marriage, our future, and our financial security. And now he's gone, leaving you to face the consequences alone. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still trying to find a way to make this my problem instead of yours. That's not true. Isn't it? You didn't call me when you found out Chad was lying to you. You didn't call me when you discovered he'd been using you to fund his con game. You only called me when you found out that his creditors might come after my business. She was quiet for a long moment. You're right, she said finally. I only called because I was scared, because I needed help, because I didn't know where else to turn. At least you're being honest now. So what happens next? I stood up and walked to the door again. Next, I protect myself. I talk to a lawyer, I document everything I can about Chad's scheme, and I make sure that when his creditors come looking for their money, they understand that I was a victim too. And us? What happens to us? I looked at her one last time, sitting on the floor of our empty house, surrounded by the ruins of the life we'd built together. There is no us, Julie. There hasn't been for months, maybe longer. Eddie, I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. Try not to steal anything else before then. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. The law office of Patricia Morrison occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Old Port District. Glass and steel, all clean lines and expensive furniture, the kind of place that charged by the hour and made no apologies for it. I'd called ahead and made an appointment, claiming to be a potential witness in the Chad Foster case. The receptionist had been eager to schedule me, probably hoping I had information that would help their clients recover some of their money. Patricia Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with a kind of sharp-eyed intelligence that made me think of a hawk watching a field mouse. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk. Mr. Banks, thank you for coming in. I understand you have information about Chad Foster's financial activities? I might, but first, I need to understand something about your investigation. My wife mentioned that you're looking at seizing marital assets to recover money for your clients. Her expression became more guarded. Are you represented by counsel, Mr. Banks? Not yet. Should I be? That depends on what your relationship to Mr. Foster was, and whether you benefited from his fraudulent activities. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording I'd made of my conversation with Julie. I'd like you to listen to this. She listened to the entire recording without comment, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When it finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. Mr. Banks, are you aware that your wife gave Mr. Foster access to $38,000 from your joint accounts? I am now. I was overseas on business when it happened. And you had no knowledge of this transaction? None. I didn't even know Chad Foster existed until I came home and found my house empty. She made more notes. What kind of business were you conducting overseas? I'm a classic car restorer. I was in Europe buying vehicles for American collectors. I have documentation of my travel, if you need it. That won't be necessary at this point, but I do need to ask. Did you benefit from any of the money Mr. Foster obtained from my clients? The only thing I benefited from was having my own money stolen while I was out of the country. Patricia Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Banks, I think there may be a misunderstanding here. You're not a target of our investigation. Based on what you've told me and what I heard in that recording, you're another victim. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. So you won't be coming after my business? We have no interest in your business. We're focused on recovering assets that were purchased with stolen money and on preventing Mr. Foster from benefiting from his crimes. What about Julie, my wife? That's more complicated. She did receive benefits from the fraudulent scheme, the dinners, the trips, the jewelry, but if she was also deceived by Mr. Foster, and if she's cooperating with our investigation, we might be able to work something out. What kind of cooperation? Information about Mr. Foster's activities, his associates, his financial dealings, anything that might help us track down where the money went. I thought about this for a moment. What if I told you I might be able to help with that? Her eyes sharpened. What kind of help? I've been doing some research on Chad Foster. My assistant is good with computers, and we've uncovered some interesting information about his business practices and his personal relationships. What kind of information? I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the screenshots Tommy had taken of Chad's social media accounts. He's been running this con for months, maybe years. Multiple women, multiple fake investment opportunities, always staying one step ahead of his creditors. She studied the images. This is useful, but it's not evidence of criminal activity. What about this? I showed her the financial documents I'd found in the storage unit. Bank statements, receipts, credit card bills that documented Chad's spending patterns. Where did you get these? My wife had them in storage with my stolen property. I found them when I was recovering my tools. Patricia Morrison spent several minutes examining the documents. Mr. Banks, these records could be very valuable to our case. They show a pattern of fraudulent activity going back months. I'm willing to share them with you, but I want something in return. What do you want? I want assurance that my business won't be touched. I want Julie held responsible for her own choices, and I want help making sure Chad Foster faces consequences for what he's done. She considered this. I can guarantee that your business assets won't be part of our recovery efforts. As for your wife, that depends on how cooperative she is. And as for Mr. Foster, we're already working with law enforcement to have criminal charges filed. He's fled the state. We know, but he can't run forever. Eventually he'll surface, and when he does, we'll be ready. I handed her copies of all the documents I'd found. There's one more thing. I have reason to believe Chad Foster is still conducting business, even while he's in hiding. He's probably looking for new victims to fund his escape. What makes you think that? Because that's what con men do. They don't retire, they just find new marks. She made more notes. If you hear anything about his current activities, I hope you'll let us know. Count on it. I left Patricia Morrison's office feeling better than I had in days. My business was safe, Chad was facing criminal charges, and I had a powerful ally in recovering what had been stolen from me, but I wasn't done with Chad Foster yet. That evening, I met Manny at his garage to update him on the situation. He listened to my account of the meeting with the lawyer, occasionally grunting or nodding to show he was following the story. So the lawyer's going after Chad, but not you? That's right. I'm a victim, not a target. And Julie? That depends on how much she cooperates with their investigation. Manny opened 2 beers and handed me one. What's your next move? I want to find Chad Foster. Why? Let the lawyers and the cops handle it. Because I want to look him in the eye when his world falls apart. Because I want him to know that some people fight back when they're pushed. Manny studied my face. This isn't about the money anymore, is it? It was never just about the money. It's about respect. It's about not letting people think they can walk all over you without consequences. Fair enough. What do you need from me? Information. You know people in the towing business, the auto repair business, the used car business. If Chad's still moving around, he's going to need transportation. And if he's still running cons, he's going to need to look successful. You want me to put out feelers. I want you to help me track him down. Manny grinned. Now you're talking my language. Over the next few days, Manny worked his network of contacts throughout New England. Tow truck drivers, mechanics, used car dealers, repo men, the kind of people who saw everything and remembered details. Meanwhile, Tommy continued monitoring Chad's digital footprint. Social media accounts, email addresses, phone numbers, anything that might give us a clue about his current location. Boss, I think I found something, Tommy said on Thursday afternoon. He showed me a screenshot from a Florida real estate website. A new agent profile for someone named Charles Fox, complete with a professional headshot that was obviously Chad Foster with different hair and glasses. Charles Fox? I said. Same initials as Chad Foster. Probably figured it would be easier to remember. Look at his bio. I read through the profile. Charles Fox was supposedly a successful developer from Maine who was expanding his operations to the Florida market. He specialized in luxury residential properties and had extensive experience with international clients. Same con, different state, I said. Gets better. Look at this. Tommy showed me a local news article about a charity fundraiser in Fort Lauderdale. The photo showed several well-dressed people at what looked like an expensive event. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was Chad Foster. When was this taken? 3 days ago, and check out who he's with. Tommy zoomed in on the photo. Chad was standing next to an older woman wearing jewelry that probably cost more than my truck. Newmark? Has to be. I did some research on her. Margaret Whitman, widow of a shipping company owner. Worth about $10 million, according to Forbes. I stared at the photo. Chad had been gone from Maine for less than a week, and he was already working on his next victim. Tommy, I need you to find out everything you can about this Margaret Whitman. Where she lives, where she socializes, what charities she supports. Planning a trip to Florida? Planning to make sure Chad Foster doesn't get away with this. That evening, I called Patricia Morrison and told her what we'd discovered. She was very interested in the information about Chad's new identity and his apparent targeting of Margaret Whitman. Mr. Banks, this is exactly the kind of intelligence we need. If we can document that he's continuing his fraudulent activities, it strengthens our case considerably. What can you do with this information? We can alert law enforcement in Florida, and we can warn Mrs. Whitman about what she's getting involved with. What about me? Can I go down there? There was a pause. Mr. Banks, I understand your desire to see justice done, but I have to advise you to let law enforcement handle this. I'm not planning to break any laws. I just want to make sure Chad Foster faces the consequences of his actions. What exactly are you planning to do? I'm planning to have a conversation with him, one victim to another. Mr. Banks, Patricia, Chad Foster stole my money, destroyed my marriage, and tried to ruin my business. The least I can do is look him in the eye and let him know that his victims aren't all going to quietly disappear. She was quiet for a long moment. If you do go to Florida, please be careful, and please keep me informed of anything you discover. Count on it. I hung up and started planning my trip south. It was time to have that conversation with Chad Foster. The flight to Fort Lauderdale gave me 3 hours to think about what I was going to say to Chad Foster when I found him. 3 hours to consider whether I was making a mistake, whether I should just let the lawyers and the police handle everything. But every time I thought about backing down, I remembered coming home to that empty house. I remembered the look on Chad's face when he'd tried to shake my hand at the bar. I remembered Julie sitting on the floor, crying about consequences she'd helped create. Some things you have to handle yourself. Tommy had done excellent research on Margaret Whitman. She lived in a waterfront mansion in Fort Lauderdale, served on the boards of 3 different charities, and had been widowed for 2 years. She was also scheduled to attend a fundraising gala at the Riverside Hotel that Saturday night. I checked into a modest hotel near the airport and spent Friday doing reconnaissance. The Riverside Hotel was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive, elegant, the kind of place where wealthy people gathered to feel good about donating money to worthy causes. The hotel's website listed Chad Foster, using his Charles Fox identity as one of the event's sponsors. He was described as a successful Maine developer, expanding his operations to South Florida. The bio mentioned his expertise in luxury residential properties and his commitment to community development. Same lies, different audience. Saturday evening, I put on my best suit and drove to the hotel. I didn't have an invitation to the gala, but I didn't need one. I just needed to get close enough to Chad to have our conversation. The hotel lobby was crowded with well-dressed people heading to the ballroom. I bought a drink at the bar and positioned myself where I could watch the entrance. Chad arrived at 8:30, wearing a tuxedo and escorting Margaret Whitman, who looked elegant in a blue evening gown and diamond necklace. They made a handsome couple. Chad played the part of the successful businessman perfectly, charming and confident, the kind of man who belonged in rooms full of millionaires. Margaret Whitman looked happy, probably thinking she'd found a wonderful new companion to share her golden years. I waited until they were seated at their table, then made my move. The ballroom was dimly lit, with round tables arranged around a small stage where a jazz trio was playing. I walked slowly through the crowd, staying in the shadows until I was close enough to Chad's table to hear the conversation. He was telling Margaret and the other guests about his latest project, a luxury condominium development in Camden, Maine, the same fictional project he'd used to steal Julie's money. The details were identical, the projected profits, the timeline, even the architect's name. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The beauty of this project, Chad was saying, is that we're getting in at the ground floor. The property values in that area are about to explode, and early investors are going to see returns of 300% or more. Margaret Whitman leaned forward, clearly interested. That sounds almost too good to be true. I understand your skepticism, Chad said smoothly, but I've been developing properties in Maine for 15 years. I know that market inside and out. What kind of initial investment are we talking about? For someone of your sophistication, I'd recommend a minimum of $200,000. That would secure you a significant stake in the project and guarantee priority access to the most desirable units. I'd heard enough. I walked over to their table and sat down in the empty chair next to Chad. Hello, Chad. Or should I call you Charles now? His face went white. Margaret Whitman looked confused. The other guests at the table stopped their conversations and stared. I'm sorry, Chad said, trying to recover his composure. Do we know each other? Oh, we know each other very well. I'm Eddie Banks. You remember, the husband of the woman whose money you stole before you disappeared from Maine. Margaret Whitman's eyes widened. Chad, what is this man talking about? Mrs. Whitman, I said, turning to face her. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but I think you should know that the man you're with is a fugitive from justice. His real name is Chad Foster, and he's currently wanted by law enforcement in 3 states for fraud and embezzlement. That's ridiculous, Chad said, but his voice was shaking. This man is obviously disturbed. Am I? Then why don't we call the police and let them sort it out? I'm sure they'd be very interested to meet Charles Fox. Chad started to stand up, but I put my hand on his shoulder and pressed him back down into his chair. We're not done talking yet. I don't know what you want, he said, but this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. You like public venues, don't you, Chad? You like to conduct your business where everyone can see how successful and respectable you are. Margaret Whitman was looking back and forth between us, trying to understand what was happening. Chad, is what this man is saying true? Of course not. He's obviously having some kind of breakdown. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of Julie's confession. Her voice was clear and unmistakable as she described how Chad had stolen $38,000 from our accounts. That's my wife's voice, I said to Margaret. She's describing how your new boyfriend convinced her to give him access to our life savings, money he used to fund his lifestyle while he was courting other victims. Margaret Whitman stood up abruptly. I think I need some air. Mrs. Whitman, wait, Chad said, reaching for her arm. Let me explain. Don't touch me, she said sharply. I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want any part of it. She walked away, leaving Chad alone at the table with me and the other confused guests. You've made a big mistake, Chad said quietly. Have I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I just saved a nice old lady from being swindled by a professional con man. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. You're a thief and a liar, and you've been running the same con for years. The only thing I don't understand is how you thought you could get away with it forever. Chad looked around the ballroom, probably calculating his chances of escape, but hotel security had noticed the commotion at our table, and 2 uniformed guards were heading our way. Gentlemen, is there a problem here? One of the guards asked. No problem, I said, standing up. I was just having a conversation with my friend Charles here about some business we conducted in Maine, but I think we're finished now. I walked away, leaving Chad to deal with the security guards and the curious stares of the other guests. As I headed for the exit, I saw Margaret Whitman in the lobby, talking urgently on her phone, probably calling her lawyer or maybe the police. Either way, Chad Foster's Florida con was over before it had really begun. I flew back to Maine the next morning, feeling more satisfied than I had in weeks. I hadn't recovered my stolen money, and I hadn't physically confronted Chad the way part of me had wanted to. But I'd accomplished something more important. I'd shown him that actions have consequences, that victims don't always stay silent, that sometimes when you push people too far, they push back. Tommy was waiting at the shop when I got back, eager to hear about my trip. How did it go, boss? Chad Foster's Florida operation is finished. He'll be lucky if he's not in jail by the end of the week. What about the money? The money's gone, but that's okay. I'll make more money. What I couldn't do is let him think he'd won. My phone rang. Patricia Morrison. Mr. Banks, I just got a very interesting call from the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. They arrested Chad Foster last night on multiple fraud charges. Is that right? Apparently, someone tipped off one of his potential victims, and she called the authorities. They're holding him pending extradition to Maine. Good news. There's more. He's agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's going to tell us where the money went and help us recover what we can for his victims. How much do you think we'll get back? Probably not much. He spent most of it. But the important thing is that he's facing justice. I hung up and looked around my shop. The cars were still there, waiting to be restored. My tools were back where they belonged. Tommy was grinning at his computer, probably already researching our next project. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I'd married Julie, but it was my life, built with my own hands, and nobody was going to take it away from me. Julie called that evening. I heard about Chad getting arrested, she said. News travels fast. Eddie, I want you to know how sorry I am about everything. I know you are. Is there any chance we could try again? Start over? I looked around my empty house, thinking about her question. No, Julie, there isn't. Why not? Because trust is like a classic car engine. Once it's broken, you can rebuild it, but it's never quite the same. And frankly, I don't think you're worth the effort. She was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now you deal with the consequences of your choices. You talk to the lawyers, you cooperate with the investigation, and you figure out how to rebuild your life without using other people's money. And us? There is no us. There hasn't been for a long time. I hung up and poured myself a drink. Outside, the sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Tomorrow, I'd start work on the Corvette that had been waiting patiently in the shop. Next week, I'd probably get a call from a new customer who needed help bringing an old car back to life. It was good work, honest work, the kind of work that built something lasting. Chad Foster was in jail, facing the consequences of his crimes. Julie was alone, dealing with the wreckage of her choices, and I was exactly where I belonged. In my shop, surrounded by the tools of my trade, ready to start the next project. Some stories don't have happy endings, but sometimes justice is enough.